Hi, everyone. We're just going to get started in just a moment. Hi, everyone. I am Brett Weissel. I'm the Global Policy and Advocacy Lead at ECDAN. And I just want to take a moment to welcome everybody to the webinar. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation on early childhood development, climate change, and COP. I think we're going to get started right away. So with that, I'd like to pass it off to Joan Lombardi, who is the chair of ECDAN's Global Policy and Advocacy Advisory Group, who's going to moderate today's discussion. Over to you, Joan.
Hey, thanks, Brett, and thanks everyone for joining from around the world. We know that the world is facing multiple crises, and children are bearing the heaviest burden. The lingering effects of COVID, the horrors of conflict, and the continued presence of climate. WHO reminds us that climate is the single biggest health threat we face. Over 1 billion children, half of the world's child population, live at high risk of climate change. And children in every continent are exposed to risks. In addition, too many children for years have been exposed to toxic substances, lead and others, and climate makes all those worse. So we have a sense of urgency to raise awareness of the impact on children, but at the same time, we know we have a sense of agency, a sense that we have to find solutions and put them into action. In a few weeks, the world leaders will come together for the Conference of Parties, COP. Many partners together in the early childhood field and in the larger children's movement have been working really hard to make sure the voices and the perspectives, the multiple perspectives of children are discussed and raised at that event. From a child rights perspective, from a health perspective, from an education perspective, and increasingly from a humanitarian perspective. So the goal of this webinar is to understand the meaning of the event that will take place when all the world leaders come together and what you can do to follow up on this important event over the next year. So we have a series of speakers. Let me tell you the format of the session. We're first going to talk with Lays Fleury, who's a representative for international relations of the Alana Institute, and Paloma Escudero, who's a special advisor on advocating for child rights and climate action. I'll then turn it to a panel on education, and then we'll move into our final panel on the Asia Pacific Network and their leadership, and we'll close it out with ECDAN. But I will just introduce those first two speakers now and the other speakers before the next panel. So with that, let me turn it to Lays.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Such an honor to join this seminar. I think I'm going to start just explaining a little bit what COPE is. As Joan said, we've been urging a climate change primary results. We've been urging a climate change crisis, and pretty much climate change primary results from human activities that increase the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, that it's leading to the global warming. And this phenomenon is causing a range of consequences, such as rising average temperatures, extreme weather events, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and also loss of biodiversity. Impacts have adverse effects on various sectors, including agriculture, health, food security, water resources, and infrastructure. And climate change exacerbates social inequalities, disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable and economically disadvantaged communities. It's not hard to understand this part, because usually, for example, the climate change affects very hardly, for example, the countries of the global south. And then when these adverse impacts happen, they don't have all the resources to deal with that, and the consequences are very, very bad. So what COPE is? The COPE is pretty much the Conference of the Parties. The COPE is the supreme decision-making body of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. It was established during the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, like 30 years ago. And all the states that are parties to the convention are represented at COP, where they assess the implementation of the convention and any other legal instrument adopted by the COP. So they make the necessary decisions to promote the effective implementation of the convention, including institutional and administrative agreements. So it's a very important meeting that all the countries, like all the states, get together there, and they make the main negotiations toward that. So what they decide that, like what they do that, they do negotiation of international agreements, pretty much to limit greenhouse gases emissions and take collective action to combat climate change. So the Paris Agreement, it's one good example of that. The second one is to establish targets and commitments. So each country, they establish their own target and their own commitment, and they set specific ones to reduce their emission and adopt more sustainable practice. And then they also they do mobilization of financial resources, pretty much with this aim to bring more like equal justice around the world. So financial resource to support especially developing countries. And they also assess monitoring of the progress, what he call global stock take, that this weird name, that this is what it stands for. It's all the process, like they monitor all the mechanisms and the progress of the countries, and they also set up like the next goal that we all have to achieve. And who attends COPs? So we have the member states, like the representative of the countries that are parties of the UNFCCC, that each country has a delegation led by negotiators representing their national interests. Then we have the observers, like non-profit organizations and civil societies, but they all go with as an observer, and they do a very important role there because they do like lobbying for more ambitious actions, and also they monitor the negotiations very closely. Also, like we have the private sector and the subsidiary bodies, and we have two subsidiary bodies there. One is for the implementation, so it's very common to see them there when we see the negotiations rooms that we have all the countries represented there. There is one person facilitating this meeting, trying to get them to get the consensus. This is the implementation one. And then we have the subsidiary body for the scientific and technological advice that pretty much they help they help to guide the policy decision based on solid scientific evidence. There is the IPCC report that they are pretty much working on that. And then what is the action agenda for COP28? So the main goal, the North Star, it's keeping 1.5 Celsius within reach. And unfortunately, to do this, like the global stocktake showed, we must reduce 22 gigatons of emissions before 2030. And in COP28, this COP is going to be quite challenging. Like the COP's presidency is Sultan Ali Jaber, and it's a little bit controversial because he's very much engaged in the fossil fuel industry. And his main goal, like the main goal of COP this year, is to ensure that we are going to reach this 1.5 Celsius goal. We need to update the country's targets in the global stocktake, and usually we do it every 5 years. And climate financing, we need to assure that $100 billion will go for developing countries. They want to ensure the full inclusion, like with a focus on people, lives, and livelihoods, and also the fossil fuel phase out, plan to achieve the 1.5 goal. So I think this is all I have for you for the Conference of the Parties. And if you have any questions about that, I'm very happy to answer it at the end of the of all the speakers. Thank you very much.
Joan, you're muted.
I'm sorry. You think after all these years we'd know. We'll be sending out resources. I know these terms are all new to everyone. We'll be sending out a series of resources to help you continue to learn over the upcoming years, actually, because this is an annual process. And we're just beginning to get more involved on the early childhood side. So with that, let me turn it to Paloma, who's been an amazing champion from UNICEF for the early childhood issue. Paloma.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joan. And I really would like to follow on the excellent presentation by Lais and Alana. What we need to understand is that for 30 years, this climate process has been very, very focused on the mitigation of the global warming, on truly trying to prevent that the global temperature of our planet goes beyond the threshold of 1.5. But that has been really something that has not been putting people, especially children, at the forefront in the agenda. Believe it or not, in those 30 plus years since the Rio conference, not a single outcome, not a single decision in any COP mentions children, especially mentions investment and protection of children, especially mentions children under 2, under 5, under 10. The only mentions that we have is regarding and related to youth engagement, thanks to the extraordinary mobilization of young people that have kept the climate agenda alive, and talks about children's participation. But that's as limited as that. They talk about energy transition, they talk about infrastructure, they talk about many, many important things, of course, on the mitigation agenda, but there is zero focus on children, zero commitments. I would say, even if you want to be listening to speeches, even in the General Assembly Climate Summit that took place in New York a few weeks ago, nobody mentions children as priority population. We have an extraordinary model on the gender community, because the gender community for the past 10 years advocated very, very strongly to have gender as priority, and they managed to incorporate in this legal policy process specific pathways on how to integrate and to make a priority on gender. Indigenous community also are a great example for us. But in the case of children, now is the moment to start, because for the first time ever in this COP28 in Dubai, we are going to talk, of course, about how to be mitigating the impact of global warming. But the latest report by the IPCC was very clear. Even if we manage to control the global warming, still the planet has already changed. Our children are already changed, and we need to be also investing and putting focus on how we are going to be adapting the way we live, how we are going to be adapting the essential social services our children depend upon from now on. And this is why, as Lais said so well, in COP28, there will be a very important agenda, because it's the first time we are taking a stock, or we are going to have a global stock take on the delivery, on the commitments on the Paris Agreement, but also a very fundamental pillar of the discussions will be how to be all supporting a new global goal for adaptations with a funding of $100 billion. And on that, we all, the community behind child rights and climate, we all want to insist that at least 50% of those 100 billion should be going to communities, should be going to families, should be going to the vulnerable people who are suffering the worst impact of this triple planetary crisis, and should be invested on adapting our water systems, sanitation system, health system, nutrition systems, education systems, and any systems that really need to be, are at the moment not coping with the enormity of this crisis. It is not easy, I tell you now, to be exposing to global leaders why children should be a priority. In their case, they assume that any decision they are taking is fine. It will be protecting children somehow. There are no evidence at the moment, and that's what we are working very closely with WHO, with UNESCO, and others to be proving what is the specific impact of the climate crisis in children. Children cannot just be treated as little adults. We know that 90% of the burden of disease due to climate is suffered by children under 5. We know that 1.7 million deaths of preventable deaths of under 2 are due to respiratory diseases that are aggravated when you live in air polluted environments. We have all that data and information, but it's not enough to make sure that any global leader, any key negotiator makes a must to be prioritizing and making children the priority, in a way, the litmus test of any outcomes in COP. This is why at the moment, I hope that after COP, and Joan was saying what will happen after COP, we have a fantastic opportunity, because in COP 30 will be in Brazil in 2025, and that COP should be the COP for children and young people. That COP should be approving a climate action plan to invest and protect children. And we have to make sure that we are not only talking, as we should, of course, about young people, we are also talking about the whole life cycle from 0 to 18. We have this year a unique leverage, a unique help to be advocating for children's rights, because we know that the climate crisis is a child right crisis. We know that 1 billion children around the world suffer every year high risk for extreme weather. But this year, the Committee on the Rights of the Child approved a very, very important general comment. It's called General Comment 26 on environment, with a special focus on climate. And on that general comment, they establish the legal guidance for every government to be guaranteeing and securing the right of every child to a healthy, clean, sustainable environment. They establish how climate change is really affecting every single right for a child: the right to education, the right to growth, the right to safety. Also, they establish very clearly that any government is accountable for any decision that is impacting this right to live in a sustainable and healthy planet for the children of today, but also for the future generations. They talk about the intergenerational justice. And also they say that any government is accountable not only for the impact of their decisions on climate change within their borders, but also the impact of their decisions beyond their borders. This is really a groundbreaking instrument for all of us to be really advocating, lobbying, making sure that more and more countries, delegations, prime ministers start to be being publicly champions for children, for children's rights, and they take a priority to invest and protect children in any outcome at COP. We are talking in any outcome on what is called the national determined contributions. They are the national plans to deliver on the Paris Agreement. Well, I can tell you, less than half of those reports going to COP28 even mention children. It is important that as they define the new global finance architecture for climate, is led by Mia Modley and the Bridgetown Initiative, children are prioritized in every investment. CERI, that is the Environmental Child Rights Coalition that many of us present here belong to, they published a very important report last June for the Paris Summit on Climate Finance, where we established that only 2.4% of all climate finance of the main 4 climate funds were devoted to children and essential services. That has to change, and we hope that thanks to all of us, thanks to be really bringing up and speaking up on the importance to protect children on the climate agenda, there will not be any decision in COP28, COP29, COP30, and whatever it takes to make sure that children become the top priority for any world leader who wants to commit to a safer planet for every child. Thank you so much, and I really hope to learn a lot in the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Paloma, thank you so much for your leadership on this, and I think you've got an army of people listening to you. We're going to ask them every meeting, every conference they have over the next year, bring that child rights document, talk about child rights, talk about the impact that it's having in their communities. So to just continue this part for a second, I want to turn it back over to Lays to talk a little bit more about, specifically about child rights.
Okay. I think Paloma has already covered a lot of the data about it. But I think it's important to say that our main goal this year and for the rest of the COPs ahead of us is to establish the Children's Action Plan. So what does it mean? It's just like you establish goals and activities to promote climate action sensitive to children and its implementation by the UNFCCC, the parties, the COP presidency, the UN entities, and all stakeholders at all levels, ensuring meaningful participation of children in the UNFCCC process. So the functions of the Children Action Plan, it would be establish mechanisms for children's participation and leadership in COPs, also to provide training and generate knowledge communication accessible to children, to ensure welcome spaces for children and caregivers at COPs, because COPs is it's not a child-friendly space at all. Ensure the implementation of climate action measures sensitive to children, such as national targets prioritizing children. I think Paloma brought very important data that we have so far, that lots of only 2.5%, for example, of the funds towards to climate action involves children, for example, and also establish measures in response to children affected by inequality and discrimination, and also monitor and regularly report on the progress of CAP. I think last year we had a COP that it was very important in this field of children's rights, and thanks to this Children First Climate movement that we established, that SIRI, that it's part of, UNICEF is part of. So it's pretty much lots of organizations that are focused on children's rights to influence negotiations at COP, because this is our main goal, to influence the negotiations, to place children, their rights and interests at the heart of the decision. And as Paloma mentioned, SIRI last year, they did an outline specific points for negotiators at COP, like we brought all the data that proves that children are the most vulnerable, impacted by climate change, but we also lined out all the asks, all what negotiators could do about it. And then we also did the Fit for Children document. And for the first time, it was very beautiful. We could testimony the presence of children in a negotiation room. We have this activist in Colombian, Francisco Vera, who participated in the GST negotiating meeting. And also we had like a webinar briefing for 50 global negotiators. So this year, what we want to make sure is that we go forward. Last year, we had the result of having children mentioned 7 times in the final decision of COP. So it was a very amazing accomplishment, but this year we are more ambitious, we want more than that. So our main goal in our incidence in COP28, it would be the participation in the negotiations room. We're going to be there lobbying for children. We also want to make sure that children's voice are going to be there. So we're producing a film. UNICEF is our partner on that as well. And our main goal is to have it exhibited in the opening session in the negotiations room. We're still negotiating about that. We want to have roundtable meeting involve negotiators. SIRI has already put out an updated joint policy briefing with our asks for this year. And of course, aiming for COP30, we want to have a legacy that whatever happens in this COP, we are going to make sure that in the COP30, we are going to lead to the first ever like children's COP, and it's going to be held in Brazil. I think that's it. Thank you.
So we're very excited about the film. We'll make sure we have the link when that's ready. I urge everyone to use it in your countries, in your communities, to get the message out. And we'll all look forward to the Children's COP in 2 years. That's very exciting. Of course, there'll be meetings in between. So let me turn it to our panel of 3 speakers. First, I'm going to introduce all 3. Ruqayyah Diawara, who's the program specialist for early care and education and the global lead at UNESCO, and been doing amazing work to bring early childhood into the global education greening movement. And then secondly, I think we're going to be joined by Foloyinka Fakoya, who's with the Global Partnership for Education, although Sarah Beardsman may also join us. And then finally, we're going to hear from James Cox, who's the head of education policy and advocacy at Save the Children International. WHO was not able to be with us today, but they wanted us to remind people that there will be a webinar and an announcement next week that WHO will be doing with several other partner agencies to make a statement about the importance of protecting the health of newborns, women, and children. So we'll again send that link out. But without further ado, let me turn it over to Ruqayyah.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, John and colleagues. I'm very happy to be here and to share also our work as UNESCO through this greening education partnership. I'm already very lucky to speak after my colleagues who already set the scene by sharing what COP is, and also by giving very strong advocacy message on why we need also to have early childhood on this global debate. For UNESCO perspective, it's through the greening education partnership, and this is embedded in UNESCO Education for Sustainable Development agenda, for which we are the lead at the UN agency, focusing in particular in the role of education in addressing climate change. Thanks to Paloma for, as I said already, the excellent advocacy message and commitment regarding children at the COP. And this is where we stand. As the Greening Education Partnership aims to empower children to become agents of change by equipping them with the knowledge, skills, attitude, and values to build environmentally sustainable society. The road to this process has been accelerated by several efforts, including the International World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development in Berlin last year, the pre-COP event in Milan, but also the Transforming Education Summit at New York. Over 70 ministers and vice ministers and almost 3,000 education and environmental stakeholders made a strong political commitment to transform learning for the survival of our planet by adopting the Berlin Declaration. This was during the World Conference on Sustainable Development, as I said already. And through that declaration, countries committed to ensure that education for sustainable development is a foundational element of our education at all levels. And when we refer to all level here, we are also including the early childhood care and education. This is also something we have maybe to share with you in terms of what are the objectives and of this partnership. During the Transforming Education, let me just give it as a recall. During the Transforming Education Summit process, the need to greening education was underscored particularly through the discussion paper and consultation thematic under the thematic action track 2, learning and skills for life, work and sustainable development. As a key outcome of the Transforming Education Summit, the Greening Education Partnership was launched that aims to deliver on the greening of early childhood settings, and we included early childhood in that, and also the schools. It was also to deliver on learning and curricula, on capacities and skills, and also to the entire community to achieve transforming education and tackles the planet crisis by harnessing education potential for climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. The objective of the Greening Education Partnership are to foster better coordination and strong collaboration among stakeholders. And this is to just enable us to have a synergetic and strategic implementation, knowledge management and research in support of a vibrant community of practices, and also advocacy and communication. Let me also tell you that through this partnership, we hope to break silos and duplication. We don't want also to continue to consider early childhood isolated to all the other initiatives. We really would like to have it included in all initiatives. And this one on greening education is extremely important for us. And this is also why during the last World Conference on Early Childhood Care and Education held last November in Tashkent, a special session was dedicated to early childhood and climate change. And now, let me tell you also where we are very quickly with this partnership. And I'm pleased to share that as of today, 81 member states and over 1,000 organizations have joined the Greening Education Partnership. The idea of greening education has gained currency with member states and stakeholders. For instance, and why it's important also to consider early childhood in is we have, for example, around 76% of member states that have joined the partnership say that they plan to review their curriculum and integrate climate change, biodiversity, and other sustainable development area into their curriculum in the next 3 years. And 87% plan to green their teacher training. And we say early childhood education must and will be integrated into any new curriculum reform in member states. And this is really something we are advocating strongly with the ministers of education, with all stakeholders also working in the area of education. Please start earlier possible, consider starting within the education, early childhood care and education. And this led us also to some action area in that greening education partnership. And we have 4 working groups. One is on working on greening schools and of course, including also early childhood settings to ensure education policy be climate smart, school facilities and operation be climate proof, decision making inclusive, and the local community engaged. This is one important area, and we have a working group working on that one. Second is on greening curriculum to ensure relevant and quality curriculum and pedagogy on climate change education. And we are also including in that sense also the preschool aspect. Greening teacher training and education system capacities to strengthen and the capacity of teachers as well as the capacity of education systems, and including policy, planning, and finance. And finally, the last working group is on greening communities for a whole of society approach to climate change education to become climate resilience through lifelong learning. And let me finish just on the COP dimension. In the next few weeks, in December, greening education will be highlighted at that COP 28, including through high-level events on climate change and education, a head of state event and ministerial session will be organized, and an open call was launched to global education partnership, greening education partnership members and other organizations, inviting them to organize session on greening education in the Greening Education Pavilion, which is hosted by the Ministry of Education of UAE and designate around 4 pillars. And the early childhood care and education will be embedded in the speech of the President of Seychelles. We have already the confirmation that he will speak about early childhood, importance of starting this action from early childhood. Finally, the UN General Assembly happening also the CIMWEC, the SDG Summit and the Climate Ambition Summit will present major opportunity to advocate also for the critical role of education as the key driver of social transformation in tackling climate change. Member states will highlight a strong political commitment on greening education and advocate for global action to accelerate the integration of the climate change education into the Greening Education Partnership in the lead up of the COP28. This is really, in sum, where we are currently working as a UNESCO to ensure inclusion of early childhood education into the global education sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakaya. I hope everybody that's listening can hear how much she is in front of this issue, integrating early childhood into it right from the beginning as it's kicking off around the world. So we're really grateful to UNESCO and to GPE for making sure that early childhood is part of this, but everybody at home has to do their part, right, to take those 4 action steps. So I want to turn it over to I think Followinka or Sarah to talk.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Joan. It will be me, Folinka, standing in for Sarah. And thanks so much, Rakaya, for really just a great presentation. And I'll just be continuing a little bit on the role of education in climate action and what GPE as a global partnership is doing in this space with a view towards COP28 and beyond. So just briefly to give a brief introduction on GPE, it's a global partnership for education, and we're the largest global fund that's solely dedicated to transforming education in lower income countries. And we're also a multi-stakeholder partnership. And we're currently working with governments in over 90 of our partner countries to build strong and resilient education systems, taking a systems approach that really acknowledges the complexity of all the different actors and components that come together to facilitate learning in an education system. And as we've heard, we know that the climate crisis is really affecting children's ability to attend school and learn and their well-being. Nearly 40 million children a year have their education interrupted by disasters, by climate disasters, and some of the subsequent events, including disease outbreaks that follow extreme weather events. And we also know that education is an absolutely critical pillar of climate action, because that's what gives children and young people the tools and the knowledge that they need to adapt to the impact of climate change, and to also, address the risks that it poses to lives, to livelihoods, and to well-being. So, GPE's approach also incentivizes countries to ensure that all children have access to at least 1 year of quality pre-primary education, as well as 12 years of basic education. And last year, about 10% of our financing went towards specifically early learning activities, which was an increase from previous years. And also about 1/3 of our grants also have components that are addressing climate-related concerns. For example, in Laos, we're working with the government to incorporate climate resilient design measures into early learning facilities, which includes drainage improvement for flood control, rainwater harvesting in water scarce areas, and also tree plantation to protect the school areas from erosion and landslides. So really working with countries to address sort of the needs that are specific to them. And so looking specifically at COP28, our focus is to really place education on the long-term climate financing and policy agenda. And as has been shared earlier by Paloma and others, we know that currently only 2.4% of climate finance is responding specifically to child-related needs. And within that, education-specific projects are negligible. So this is a real gap in this area. And so what we're doing going into COP is working on the political declaration, which was developed from a shared messaging document, which got broad consensus across the education sector. And so out of that, there's actually been developed a political declaration, which covers sort of 3 pillars of adaptation, mitigation, and investment. And this has been signed by 15 countries and is growing. And this was developed in partnership with UNESCO and the Greening Education Partnership, which Rukai spoke about earlier. And so in this declaration, they're really governments are making commitments to identify vulnerabilities, to develop, to emphasize the role of education and its role in supporting learners to develop the knowledge and skills to adapt to new climate realities. They're also pledging to develop comprehensive education sector strategies and to build climate smart and resilient education systems. And they're also pledging to invest in education as well. So these commitments are gaining momentum, and we have countries committing to including education in their national adaptation plans and their nationally determined contributions. And so the next step here is really ensuring that the specific needs of children in the early years and children are really included in the implementation of these agreements. And you'll see a little comms thing. So we're also using leveraging our communications platforms to share and amplify the impact of climate change on children. Specifically at COP, we have a virtual reality installation that aims to raise awareness of how education is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and how education can also drive climate action. The virtual reality experience specifically is centered around the experience of a young girl in Mozambique. So it's a 5-minute virtual reality experience in the aftermath of Cyclone Freddy. So really kind of bringing people to that perspective and seeing sort of the impact on children and what is needed to really build resilience. On the knowledge and research side, we have been working with partners with Save the Children, who you'll hear from shortly, on some research to help policymakers better understand the cost implications and the savings of building climate smart education systems. And that's something that will also be launched and amplified at COP. And GPE had developed the Climate Smart Education Systems Framework to support countries provide technical assistance to education ministries with mainstreaming climate budgets into the education sector policies, plans, and budgets. And so, you know, there's an initiative coming out of that is going to be supporting 20 countries. It's currently being piloted in Malawi and Zimbabwe, but will be expanding over the next period. And with partners, we're really working to provide that assistance to ministry so that they can really integrate these concerns as they're planning as they're carrying out their education sector planning. And this, the framework and the initiative really specifically calls out the special needs and the special considerations of the early years and the need for differentiated approaches, for the different stages of learning. It really notes how climate change and environmental disasters really impact young children and hinder their physical development and their cognitive development. And it notes that, a core component of a climate smart education system is to build that foundation early in life and to ensure that continuity as children move into schools. So, within the framework, we're really putting in place systems to support countries as they integrate these considerations within their sectoral planning. And of course, at COP, we will be having multiple events across different platforms, really continuing to amplify this message. And as I shared earlier, to really look at how we can continue to put education on that long-term policy agenda. Thank you. That's it from me.
Well, that was terrific. Both of those presentations, we're getting a lot of questions in the chat about people want the virtual reality resource you mentioned and specific questions about how they integrate early childhood into curriculum, into teacher training. And we'll be continuing over the next few weeks to send out resources help answer some of those questions. But let me turn it for a real multiple sector approach to James at Save the Children.
Thank you so much, Joan, and thank you, colleagues, for setting me up so well and the great presentation so far. It's a privilege to join you here today. As I think everybody on the call will know, in early childhood care and development, we focus on a young child's development from a holistic perspective and the importance that every child has good health, nutrition, safety, security, early learning, and responsive caregiving if they're going to reach their full potential. And how much that is a right of theirs that we all need to deliver on. Just as ECCD isn't just about preschool education, it's about all sectors coming together to ensure this. The climate crisis isn't a single sector issue either. So we're trying to be holistic in our approach both to early childhood development, but also to the climate crisis. There's many challenges here, many relevant programs and policies to both areas, may be tagged or defined in many different ways as child or caregiver well-being, as ECCD in emergencies, as climate adaptation, or as disaster response to droughts, floods, fire. But very rarely will be directly labelled as both climate and ECC programming, if indeed they're tagged as either. So with that and the fact that many different programs will be led by multiple different sectors, not just education and health, but also protection, disability, inclusion, livelihoods, gender equality, and mental health, it's clear that a true multi-sectoral approach to ECCD and climate crisis at COP and beyond is imperative. So first of all, what we're doing at Save the Children, we're developing a climate responsive ECCD system thinking approach, which aims to guide our programs and policies for children from birth to 8, but also their caregivers, to adapt and mitigate direct and indirect climate and environment related adversities. This is around 3 pillars. One is protecting caregivers and children from the increased adversity from the climate crisis and environmental degradation, particularly with those at higher risk of not meeting their potential. 2 is protecting and nurturing young children's bonds, their playful interactions, and their sense of safety with their caregivers. Of course, we all know how crucial this is. And 3 is to increase the quality and scale of inclusive and holistic services that foster nurturing care, again with a real focus on the most marginalised and impacted by inequality and discrimination. But of course, COPS is an opportunity to build on the important work we're doing internally, and it's really critical we work with many of you and beyond to build on that and strengthen the recognition of the importance of ECCD in the pathway to climate resilience and sustainable development. So what are we doing in the build-up and at COP? So we've got a multiple year Generation Hope campaign. This is Save Children's global campaign that we're carrying on for the next 3 or 4 years. And the foundation of that is children's voices. We surveyed over 50,000 children from around the world, and it was clear from their responses that we need to treat the climate crisis as an intergenerational issue, and one that's across all sectors, how the impacts they're feeling are multi-sectoral. So how does that manifest itself at COP? Well, the specific priorities we're lifting out from those children's priorities. 1, on climate finance, so making sure that children, including young children, are recognised in the negotiations of the new collective quantified goal on climate finance and in the negotiations on the Loss and Damage Fund. This is clearly about more than early childhood care and development, but it's critical for progress on ECCD. Secondly, we're working in partnership with many on the call here to secure commitments in a few areas. 1 on education, health, and cross-sectoral. On education, we've already heard from Folinka about the exciting progress we expect to see on the expansion of the Climate Smart Education Systems Initiative. We're working with GPE and UNESCO, but we also hope to see major steps forward to build on last year's COP, both with the Green Climate Fund and with other initiatives. For example, the Teachers for the Planet will be launching their 100 teacher-led solutions for climate change. And between these different areas, we think we're going to see some real systemic steps forward for education and climate that the sector, particularly including the ECCD sector, can really build on beyond COP and hopefully have a strong, powerful narrative going beyond just December. In health, we're really focusing on the scaling up of child-focused, community-led climate and health action and system-based interventions. And across sectors, really important, we're using our convening power to support locally led adaptation and shifting power and around emergency preparedness, response and anticipatory action. So how do we achieve that? I think these are our approaches, but I think crucial for the sector as a whole. Firstly, working in partnerships. Of course, this webinar is an example of partnership, and so is ECDAN and ARNEC and other colleagues and platforms on the call. And I've already mentioned some of the work we're doing with GP, UNESCO and others. We'll be on various platforms with colleagues, including on the new climate financing paper, Ferlinka mentioned, and hopefully with ECDAN and ARNEC on greening education and bringing those children's voices in there. We'll be scaling up our partnerships on locally led adaptation, as I mentioned, but also working with partners such as the Global Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction in Education Systems and their updated comprehensive school safety framework. And on the health side, we're part of the steering committee for the COP Health Day, and we've really been pushing to ensure that their focus will include distinct impacts on health for young children. But also beyond health and education, we hope to bring forward a multi-sectoral lens. For example, we've got a fantastic partnership with the WWF on green generations around education for sustainable development. So how do we bring in unusual partners is, I think, really important in spaces such as these. Secondly, child participation. So we've been supporting and amplifying children's own campaigning, both nationally and globally, in pre-COPs and in YOUNGO, the official child and youth constituency of the COP and the UNFCCC, to support the development of a child rights group within the network and with the Climate Youth Negotiator programme to link children's networks with the Youth Negotiator. Obviously, we realise the challenge always when advocating for the youngest children, but we hope these are good systematic ways to strengthen those linkages. We'll be organising events with governments, other partners on the call and beyond to carry on making sure children's voices listened to and heard. And we'll be building on the recently launched UN Committee on the Rights of the Child General Comment 26 that other colleagues have already mentioned, to make sure that children's voices are strengthened through at COP and beyond. And finally, through our research, evidence and communications. So colleagues may have already seen our Falling Short report, which is our holistic research on the overall climate finance gap for children. But then Ferlinka has already mentioned the research we're doing with GPE on the impact of the climate crisis on education specifically, and the crucial role that education has to play in addressing that crisis as well, and how it can be a cost saver. So I hope that can be a useful tool for all our advocacy at COP and beyond. And we'll be amplifying our work and through our comms, media and social media teams. That includes both this new resource, but also I think we don't want to forget the existing resources and declarations we already have, such as the Tashkent Declaration that colleagues worked on last year. And I think to try and conclude and wrap this all up together, what happens at COP is always a culmination of a huge amount of work done by many organizations to really build consensus and drive political will. And then once we get to COP, holding governments to account, keeping up momentum to deliver on commitments will be crucial. So what we need to do is make sure that we don't silo ECCD into our own little sectors, that we build consensus with as broad a community as possible, and we carry on bringing in different voices. And if there's one thing I really leave you with, it's both an ask and an offer. There's still a huge amount of advocacy to be done within our own organizations to keep ECCD as a priority and keep children's voices really in there. One useful tool I find when reminding colleagues internally on this is that the UNFCCC convention, really how much it really prioritized education, recognized how critical it was. It has its own article, it's Article 6, before the articles are even created to COP itself. It's time that we get that recognized again. I think we've had huge progress since COP last year, and I think this COP will be a big step forward. But I think please join us, ECDAN and others, to build on that momentum at COP, but beyond as well, at the AU Year of Education, at Summit of the Future, and hopefully we can build on that progress together.
Thanks so much, James, and thanks for Generation Hope. That Save the Children is bringing that forward, but it's all of our hope, so we all need to use that. Before we lose our panelists, I want to make sure that I ask each of them, what can people that are listening, people that are in countries at the community and country level do either before COP or as a follow-up? What's your advice? Just brief comments from each of you, and I'll start with Paloma and then go to Liz.
No, this is a critical question. I think at the moment, elevate your voices, make a very strong noise about the impact of climate crisis in the little ones, in the children under 2, under 5, under 10. And at the moment, that's not well known, that's not well prioritized. So at the moment, really, I would say, use your influence. All of you are really high professionals with amazing networkers. So, and I use the example of the gender community and the indigenous community. I mean, they are really such a good example for the advocacy and the lobby we need. But I would say at this moment, speak up, speak up, speak up. Explain why the early childhood development has to be an essential part on any answer to tackle the impact of climate crisis on children, on education, on health, on social protection, why we have to be educating and supporting parents, social workers, teachers, administration, or civil servants. Really, at the moment, I think that we have to be working at community level, raising awareness, but also whoever of you have influence on governments, prime ministers, key ministers, to making sure that we start to have public champions for children at governments. We do not have those. We cannot now name 5 political leaders, prime ministers, who really are going out there as real champions for children's rights in any fora, but of course, being COP the key fora. So at the moment is the moment to make noise, to speak up, but with evidence and with proposals in our hands. And fora like this one is what we need. We need to be bringing the whole community of ECD involved in the climate agenda, as we did in the past so well, to be raising so much the ECD agenda on any government agenda.
Well, Paloma, we're going to report back to you in a year, and hopefully we'll have a lot more voices and a lot more government leaders and local leaders that are starting climate action plans and starting with children. So we thank you for that. Lays, any words that you'd like to leave about what should happen next?
Yeah, I think I think what should happen next is really like in the scope, for example, to whatever happens there, we build up a legacy to happen in all the COPs ahead of us. And it's very exciting that the next COP it's going to be in Brazil, because the government right now in Brazil, it's very open to it. And we have already started to articulate with them. So we need to advance, like, because whatever happens in this scope, in the next scope, it needs to be like even more and more and more and more audacious. So yeah, so I think we need to get more leaders to commit to the Children Action Plan. And fortunately, hopefully in Brazil, we will have like the first really like child-led COP, like COP for children. Thank you, Joan.
Great. Meantime, people that won't happen if we don't start at the local and national level. Ruqayyah.
Thanks. For next, I think I will be very short. I really am dreaming, like also my predecessor, I'm dreaming to see the next COP with already evidence done. We have achieved this. From this scope to the other one, this is what we have done concretely for the children and with the children regarding climate change and all other related subjects. This is really something maybe we have to do to move from the advocacy part to the action part, to be sure that we are demonstrating what we are proposing, what we are pushing for, and we are having also an increasing number of leaders who will be also convinced by that, by demonstration. They will already see concrete fact, and they will echo our voice, our action, and everything, and commit also to move with the children and for the children.
Well, thank you. And I just want to remind people, Ruqayyah put on the table a 4-part strategy of the action plan: schools, which include community-based early childhood programs, curriculum, teacher training, and community action. use that framework. And let's make sure we also integrate children with special needs. We don't want them left behind. They have special issues related to climate, and we have to remember to integrate that into everything we're doing. Sarah, I don't know if you're with us, if you want to comment.
Hi, Joan. Thank you so much. And apologies, I had to join late today because of a board meeting at GPE. But I think I'm going to echo some of the comments I've actually already seen in the chat, because what our challenge is this political mobilization, which I think we're finally turning the corner on at COP28 with this huge focus on education. And I think that's a really important entry point that we can use. But the question is, how do we then drive that into actual implementation at country level and more financing for this agenda? So I think in that sense, what can at the national level and at the community level, what can we do? We have to advocate for early childhood to be reflected in national education sector policies and plans, and in the budgets associated with them. And also in the climate policies, the national adaptation plans and the nationally determined contributions need to include early childhood, because that's actually how climate finance can be unlocked. Those strategies need to include early childhood in order for the climate funds to actually see that as a part of a national strategy. So I think the more that we can get governments to commit to a political declaration to include children and young people in their climate policies. And then we need advocacy and monitoring. So next year at COP, how many countries have actually done that? The following year, how many countries have actually done that? So let's actually create an accountability mechanism where we're tracking year on year what countries are doing this. And then let's help incentivize them to do it more with community mobilization, social mobilization, and policy advocacy to make sure that they're integrated in the national strategies and budgets.
Well, and thank you, Sarah, for being such a good advocate for young children. I know you've got the whole developmental spectrum, but you've been a real champion. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Joan.
James, if you could close out this before I move it on to our next panel.
Certainly. Well, it's no great surprise that Sarah's articulated the importance of accountability better than I could. So I think that leaves me with the importance of supporting child and youth participation. So I think what I'd ask colleagues to do is make sure that we support the perspectives of children and youth in your communications and the events you're doing in the build up of that COP and beyond. So how if we can work together to support that in the Conference of Youth, COI, and in local Conference of Youth in future, I think that's a really important way that we can build up momentum and also have a solid platform for children and youth to bring into education or ECCD focused events in future. So when we're talking about the African Union Year of Education or Summit of the Future, we have a strong foundation for that youth and child advocacy as much as possible.
Well, and thank you, James, to say for the amazing resources that you've been providing. We need to put those to use. So I'm going to thank that panel and turn to a few short presentations. But before I do, I want to make sure that everyone understands that what the Early Childhood Development Action Network has been doing has been helping lead an effort to bring the global perspectives that you've been hearing today together around climate. We have a working group. We're meeting on a regular basis, and we're going to continue to do that. ECDAN is revamping their website so we can provide more of these resources to you in an easier way. So you're going to be hearing more about that in a moment. But first, I want to turn it over to these wonderful colleagues from the Asia Regional Network and get their perspective. Evelyn Santiago and everyone in that region was like a voice in the wilderness for years, talking about climate and early childhood. So we owe that region a great shout out of gratitude. They've got a jump start on resources. She's going to share some of that. She's also going to we're going to hear from Erwin Mahendra Eka Saputra, who is a youth advocate from Indonesia. And I would urge everyone, help the youth know about young children so they can speak with them and on their behalf. So let me turn it, I'm really honored to turn it over to Evelyn and Erwin for some remarks.
Thank you, Joanne, for recognizing the work that RNEC does in this region in relation to the intersection of ECD and climate change. Good morning and good evening, everyone. Much has been said from the previous presentations, but I would just like to highlight 3 points from our end. First is really the urgency to support young children, not just in Asia Pacific, but on the rest of the world, from the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation. We know that climate change is here. We've been, it's already happening. It is a daily reality for many of us here in the Asia Pacific region. We endure frequent flooding episodes, bad air pollution days, extreme weather events. So there is a need to really address this issue. Young children and their families, as already mentioned by Joanne in the beginning, bear an unequal burden from the impacts of this climate change and environmental degradation. Although they contribute the least to carbon emissions. As such, we really need to break the cycle of climate injustice and inequity and uphold the rights of young children. The second point I want to make relates to the groundwork that we're doing leading up to COP28. For the first time ever, ECD is being featured at COP. And so this is really a huge milestone, and we're very happy to be part of some of the ECD events, at COP with ECDAD, UNESCO, UNICEF, Capita, and Save the Children, and many other partners. For RNEC, we are very pleased to have started this journey linking ECD and climate change since 2019. We have released, at that time, the Hanoi Call to Action, which we received, the attention of more than 600 participants from that RNEC conference, including ministerial delegates and practitioners, an event that really highlighted the link of ECD with physical environment. Over the course of 2021 to 2022, we created a regional alliance between RNEC, Save the Children, and UNICEF IPRO, where we jointly worked on a scoping study, most vulnerable to most valuable, to draw attention on the need to put young children at the center of climate actions and environmental protection. That scoping study we have used to develop our framework of action that looks at 4 action pillars of capacity building, advocacy, partnerships, and building knowledge hub. We also use the results of the scoping study to inform various advocacy and learning events we held and supported in the region, which include the holding of our RNEC conference, focusing on this issue in 2022. There was also the Pacific ECD Forum early this year, and the ASEAN Policy Dialogue on ECCE held in August of this year in Jakarta, and of course the various webinars we held in the region on this advocacy. Third and last point I want to make relates to COP28 and beyond. Joanne asked earlier, so what do we do after COP? In the region, we continue to collaborate with partners across sectors and with different change agents, such as parents and youth groups, especially in the areas of research and evidence, capacity building for advocacy. We will soon release a COP28 ECD Climate Resource Pack with a collection of advocacy materials that aim to increase knowledge and understanding on this intersection of ECD and climate change. These advocacy materials will include micro research we've done with some countries, and will customize and translate for use, as we build capacity in the countries, starting in Indonesia, Bhutan, and South Asia sub-region for this year and next year. In summary, I think our hope, is for this COP28 is to see the ECD agenda elevated as a key building block to climate resilience and sustainable development. That is our hope, to uplift our most vulnerable young children to the most valuable, and we'll really look forward to COP 30 for young children. Thank you for the opportunity to share, and I turn it over to Joanne.
And so really great that you mentioned the resource pack. So that will be available for people next week, or
Yes, we're in the final stage of designing it. It's actually available, but we'll release it next week. It's a collation of all the advocacy materials that we've done over the years, including the micro research studies from 4 countries.
Great. So what she's underlying is that you can do research at the community level, and that's as important as the bigger global efforts that are taking place around the world. Thank you, Evelyn, and we'll make sure that everybody gets that out. I know you've got a conference coming up in March, and there's also one in East Africa, and we're hoping to have dialogues around climate at both of those events. With that, thanks for your leadership, Evelyn, and to your whole team, to Rowan when she was with you, to Hekji, to Adrian, who we think of, who helped us learn so much about this. Erwin, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Joanne, for the opportunity. I would like to explain what is the opportunity and challenging to engage young people in ECD. Engaging young people in advocating for young children and family impacted by climate at COP28 is very crucial. The energy, passion, and fresh perspective that young people can bring and drive innovative solutions and ensure more a sustainable future. But sadly, based on the Children Climate Risk Index report, just 40% from all countries that mention children in their national determined contribution. It's very important to raise up the voice of children at COP28 and encourage all parties to include children at their climate commitment or climate action, especially on their NDC. Huge opportunities for youth to champion underrepresented voice and needs of children into climate discourse, negotiation so they can get support to deservingly need in the face of climate emergency. For the first opportunity to engage young people at climate negotiation is through youth delegation. Facilitate the participation of youth delegation at COP28, especially for young teacher, young parent as well. Provide them opportunities to engage in discussion, share perspective, and actively contribute to decision making. The second is through side event. Host the side event that especially focus on the impact of climate change on young children. This side event will provide a platform to young people to represent, research ECD resources, share their experience on the grassroots level, and propose solutions in engagement on ECD. The third is about digital and media engagement. Leverage social media and digital platform to amplify young people voice. Encourage them to share stories, create awareness campaign on ECD, because as we know, to learn climate change is very difficult. There's a lot of difficult about the terminology of climate change. The fourth is establish the partnership with youth-led organization. Collaborated with youth-led organization and network focused on climate change. This organization can bring together diverse perspectives to enhance advocacy effort. Based on my reflection and best practice on climate action campaign project that I have been implemented on 2022, the first young people have a easy to understand style and language to communicate climate change. And the second, young people have a wide network and the involvement of young people organization in disseminating of climate education. The fifth is organize workshop and dialogues and bring young people, policymakers, ECD experts to discuss the challenges of young children face in context climate change. This is one of best practice that ARNEC and Indonesia ECD National Coalition did in Indonesia last October. And the challenges is to engage young people in ECD issue is the first limited of expertise. Young people may lack in deep knowledge of early childhood development. The solution of this challenge is to collaborating with ECD expert and network. So developing the capacity of young people in ECD. In the Indonesia context, there are many youth movements that targeted young children, but they don't know the deep about this ECD issue. And the last is lack of policy and urgency of stakeholders regarding to ECD. In Indonesia context, ECD has not become a main priority. The main priority is focus start from elementary school. In addition, there's no integrated climate education into the curricula. A last message from me at COP28, I'm looking forward to advocate and speak up for young children and families. After all, early childhood is a key building block to achieve climate resilient and sustainable development. Thank you. Over to you, Joan.
Thank you, Erwin, and thank you for leading the way. Erwin has been instrumental on our working group in raising the voice of youth. You mentioned reaching out to youth in the community. So if I'm an early childhood program, what's your advice to people on the ground on how to link with the youth advocates in their countries, in their communities? Either Evelyn or Erwin.
Okay, thank you so much, Joan. My advice to stakeholders and party, please engage youth in meaningful engagement. Give us the opportunity to capacity development, especially on ECD. Because based on my reflection, in Indonesia, the campus and then youth-led organization have many social activity that targeted on young people. But the challenge is they need develop capacity related to ECD. It will more effective to advocating ECD if young people have capacity and expertise in ECD issue. Thank you. Over to you, Joan.
Yeah, so Erwin, a few of the comments that came in is that it is challenging to link to establish those linkages between early childhood and youth. But I think what you're saying is there's many youth groups out there that are already working. There's schools you can link to. We have to make the extra effort because youth are getting more and more visible in the climate space, and they are our critical partners. One shout out before I ask Evelyn for any final comment here is that I know their world has been establishing youth ambassadors around a range of early childhood issues to really help youth understand what we talk about in early childhood. So we'll be watching that closely and sending out further information. Evelyn, in all your years of doing this work, what's the lesson you learned?
I think I also want to echo what Erwin said, that we need to elevate the voices of youth. They can be very good champions for young children. And so what we did in Indonesia very recently, we ran what we call our ECD and Climate 101 workshop, looking at the basic linkages of ECD and climate change. And in that, we partnered with a coalition in Indonesia, ECD Coalition. And then we brought Erwin and a couple of youth representatives, including the SHIFT team, which is led by Save the Children. So it's all about youth mobilization. And I'm also happy to note or to say that Erwin is actually undertaking and leading a micro research on Indonesia that looks at the impacts of young children from the perspective of parents and ECC teachers, the ECD workforce, and also focusing on a very specific issue of waste management. So with that, Joan, I think one of my learnings is that we really go beyond the usual ECD stakeholders like for example, these youth groups, the parent groups, women's groups, and then sometimes it's difficult for them to understand it from a generic, perspective, like ECD and climate change, and the linkage of that. But if we go down to specific, climate risk, and issues such as air pollution, flooding, waste management, I think it's more understandable, especially at the level of communities. So we work, we continue to work in engaging countries, the communities and youth groups and parent groups.
Very important advice to reach out beyond our normal, our friends that we've been working with for years. This is about building partnerships, and you've been emphasizing that all along. Brett, before I turn it over to Elizabeth for some final comments, is there any questions, many questions in the chat? Is there anything that you'd like to raise about that here?
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining. And I think one of the takeaways that I'm walking away with is the continued need for that steady drumbeat of advocacy, particularly at the country level, because we know that many of you are not able to participate at COP. But there are still critical entry points at the country level that we all need to engage in to elevate the needs of young children and their caregivers. And we've heard some of them. We need champion countries, which means we need advocacy targeted at policymakers at the country level that will be champions for young children and champions for children at COP. We need to integrate early childhood development into the climate action plans that emerge at the country level. And so these are opportunities that you don't need to be engaged at COP. You don't need to be involved with COP specifically. These are country level opportunities and country level entry points that all of us need to think about and integrate into our ongoing advocacy work. So just want to recognize the work that's happening at the country level, because that is where we'll also, it's not just the COP, it's that country level advocacy that is so critical. And we need your voices, and we need the connections and networks that you're all participating in.
And we'll be turning to ECDAN for sharing those resources, because it's all about all of us learning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. But before I do, I want to thank everybody for hanging in there with us for an hour and a half. Our hearts are heavy with the burden that children are feeling all over the world through, again, the lingering effects of COVID, the horrors of war, and now the ever-presence of climate. Don't get discouraged. Put your passion into action, and let's make changes in the world for a better place today and tomorrow. Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you, Joan, for your excellent moderation, and thank you to all the panelists for sharing, but also to the participants for hanging in there with us to talk about this very important issue. Climate change is real, it's here with us, it's happening, and the impacts on children are real as well, and their caregivers. And I think what I heard from this meeting is how much more we need to do together to build the momentum. And for the first time, I think we will have many events at this COP that are highlighting and elevating the impacts of climate change on children, but not just as victims, but also as part of the solution, which means that we as ECD partners must do much more to integrate climate change in our ECD national policies, the coordination mechanisms, and as we heard at the country level and at the global level, build those the opportunities of connecting with other movements beyond preaching to always the converted and those who always we speak to most of the time. But what I heard, as others said, let's elevate our voices, keep up the drumbeat, build the champions, have presidents speak about this issue. And I'm so excited about the opportunity that was shared about Brazil, the Brazil COP being children-led and inclusive of children, and the issues of children being elevated in all the plans in resilience, part of prevention, mitigation, and being a priority in national plans as well, and also access to financing at the end of the day. So as we go forward, I think it's going to be very important that we have the researchers, the implementers, and advocates working together to make sure that ECD is integrated into climate action plans at the country level. And we've also committed to sharing and building out a resource hub to keep partners informed, and then share all the resources and frameworks and changes that are happening to curricula through the greening of partnership and the work that GPE is doing and the micro research that is happening at the country level. And in addition to the events that we will have at COP together with UNICEF and ANEC and UNESCO and other partners, I think we'll try and draw up a list of all that. And obviously we will debrief at the end of COP with all of you to see what, how we build on whatever has been achieved or what we've learned at the COP. But most importantly, we're actually issuing also a call to action that has been co-created with our partners. And we will also disseminate any other calls to actions that will be developed by other partners as well. And it is through this collective action that we can really build the momentum that we need to elevate this issue. You can, I think, also, I don't know if the call to action has been shared, Brett, in the chat, or will be shared later at some point.
It has been shared in the chat.
Okay, good. All right. So please sign on your organizations, sign on as individuals, and let's elevate our voices and shout from the rooftops about this issue to COP and beyond COP. And then I think let's all join the Generation Hope campaign that Save the Children has launched and that will continue over the years. And many other campaigns, I'm sure, that will be developed by other partners as well. I think let's have 1,000 flowers bloom on this issue and disseminate what each one of us is doing and share the resources together. So for now, let me thank all of you for the important work and leadership that you're providing on this issue. And we look forward to debriefing after COP and to continue on this work forward. Let's save the planet. Let's make the children the solution, but also let's address and protect their rights from the impacts of climate change. Thank you all, and have a good compliments of the season, as we say in Africa, with the oncoming holidays as well. Thank you.